The door didn't move when I pushed it. No creak, no protest, just a hard, final stillness, as if the house itself had decided to hold its breath. The air was thick, sharp at the back of my throat, and somewhere beyond the walls, something was burning that shouldn't have been. I remember pressing my palm flat against the wood, feeling the cold certainty of it pushing back. If you're listening to this and you've ever trusted the wrong person, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this don't happen as far away as we think. I stood there in the dark, barefoot on the floor, realizing the problem wasn't the door at all. It was the silence behind it. The kind of silence that feels intentional, calculated. As smoke began to creep low and slow across the room, I understood something had gone terribly wrong, and it wasn't an accident. That was the moment everything I believed about my life and my family began to unravel. I woke to the sound of nothing, which is how I knew something was wrong. The door would not open. I pressed my palm against the wood and felt it hold, firm and unmoving, as if the house itself had decided to stop breathing. I am 74 years old, and by that age you stop assuming every problem has a simple explanation. When I was younger, I would have blamed swollen wood or a stubborn latch. That night, instinct spoke louder than reason. I leaned in, slow and careful, feeling the grain beneath my skin, the quiet pushing back at me. No rattle, no give, just silence, heavy and watchful. I tried again, putting more of my weight into it. My shoulder protested, my joints aching in the familiar way age announces itself. For a moment, I wondered if this was my body failing me. Then my hand brushed something cold beneath the paint. Not a hinge, not a handle, something fixed, deliberate. I stood there, listening. Houses settle and sigh in the dark. Mine did neither. The air felt wrong, sharp and waiting. That was when understanding began to form. This was not a door stuck by chance. This was a door meant to stay closed, and I was meant to be on the wrong side of it. I smelled the smoke before I saw it, thin and sour, creeping under the door like a thought I did not want to finish. Panic never came. At my age, you learn that rushing only steals air. I moved to the window, fingers stiff, paint catching under my nails as I forced it upward inch by inch. The glass did not want to give. I lifted the small chair from the vanity and swung it with what strength I had left. The first strike cracked, the second split, the third opened a way out. Shards cut my arms, sharp and bright. But the pain felt far away, as if it belonged to a younger woman. I climbed through slowly, lowering myself into the cold dirt below, knees trembling, breath steady. When I stood and looked across the yard, I saw her. My daughter was there beneath the porch light, still and upright, holding her phone at chest height. She was not calling out. She was not moving toward me. She was watching. In that moment, something colder than smoke settled in my chest. I understood that the fire behind me was not the real danger. A siren rose in the distance, low and growing, red light beginning to sweep across the lawn. I stayed where I was, smoke clinging to my clothes, blood drying on my skin. Whatever this night was meant to do, it had already failed, and whatever truth had been waiting in the dark had begun to make itself known. There was no turning back after that. When the trucks arrived, the yard filled with movement and light. Hands guided me to a blanket, fingers checking my arms, my face, the places where glass had opened me. I kept my answers plain. I had been inside. I had climbed out through the window. Nothing more felt necessary. They moved past me into the house, boots heavy on the steps, hoses dragging like long shadows, steam pushed back out through the broken window, carrying the smell of burned wood and something sharper. I watched my daughter stand near the hedge, arms folded tight, eyes tracking every motion, as if she needed to stay ahead of what might be discovered. Not long after, the bedroom door came out. It was blackened but intact, carried carefully into the light. I saw the nails then, driven deep and crooked, bright against the scorched grain. They looked recent, intentional. No explanation could soften that sight. I said nothing. I did not need to. I felt the shift around me, the pause that comes when professionals see something they did not expect. My daughter's stillness grew rigid, her calm thinning. A quiet certainty settled in my chest. Truth was forming its own shape without my help. Soon, they told me I could not stay. As the house fell silent again, I understood this night was only beginning, and I would have to face the rest of it alone, with no shelter left anywhere. I was taken to a small motel just off the highway, the kind with thin curtains and a heater that rattled all night. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet. It was warm enough, clean enough, safe in the most basic sense. I sat on the edge of the bed and noticed how quiet my body felt, as if the danger had drained something vital and left a hollow calm behind. My arms stung where the glass had cut me, thin lines of red already drying. But the pain barely registered. What I felt instead was cold. Not fear, not anger, just a spreading chill that settled deep and refused to move. People think betrayal burns. It does not. It cools you from the inside out. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her again, standing in the yard while my house filled with smoke. That image replayed without sound, without explanation, until sleep gave up trying. I lay there listening to the heater knock and the traffic pass, wondering how a life can change so completely and yet leave the world outside untouched. Sometime before morning, a harder thought surfaced. How long had I been making myself smaller to keep peace? How often had I chosen silence because it felt safer than disappointment? The question stayed with me, heavy and unanswered, and my mind drifted backward to years when trust felt simple and help still meant care. Those memories opened a door I was not ready to walk through yet, but it was already moving inside. I used to run my life with steady hands. I managed the house, the bills, the small decisions that keep days moving forward. When my husband died, the quiet did not arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, leaving spaces I did not know how to fill. Grief softens you in ways no one warns you about. That was when my daughter began coming by more often. At first it felt like care. She offered to sort paperwork, to explain things she said were complicated now. I was tired, and it felt easier to let her step in than to argue that I was still capable. I told myself help was love wearing a practical face. There were moments that tugged at me, decisions made without asking. Gentle corrections that sounded like concern. I noticed them, then dismissed them, because noticing felt ungrateful. Silence became my way of keeping harmony. I learned how to nod, how to agree, how to swallow small discomforts before they grew teeth. Looking back, the shift was quiet. What began as assistance slowly became permission. I asked before acting in my own life. I explained myself when no explanation was owed. Somewhere along the way, authority changed hands without a single argument. Sitting alone in that motel, the pattern finally lined up. Love and grief had opened the door, and I had stepped aside to keep peace. The realization was not loud, but it was clear. If I did not reclaim myself now, there would be less and less left to protect. That understanding marked the moment everything inside me quietly began to turn. Morning came without asking permission. I had not slept, but the shock had burned itself out, leaving something steadier behind. Fear was still there, but it no longer held the wheel. In its place was a simple clarity that surprised me. I showered, dressed, and stepped into the early light as if following instructions I had finally agreed to hear. I called a cab and gave the driver the address of the bank I had used for years. The ride was quiet. I watched familiar streets pass and felt myself settling into my spine. Inside, the air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and metal. When I held my documents again, they felt heavier than their weight. Deeds, insurance papers, old signatures written in my own hand, proof that I had lived a life before anyone tried to shrink it for me. I realized then how deeply I had been underestimated. I moved carefully, deliberately, as if each step mattered. No anger pushed me forward. No need to explain myself. This was not retaliation. It was protection. By the time I stepped back outside, the morning had fully arrived. Cars moved, people hurried, the world continued. And so would I. I understood something important as I stood there holding my papers close. Taking care of myself was not cruelty, it was responsibility. With that settled inside me, I knew my next stop would be the place where truth is named and what happened can no longer hide from view. The office was quiet in a way that felt different from the motel. The floors creaked softly. The air held the weight of other stories told behind closed doors. I sat down and laid out the facts the same way I had held my documents earlier. Carefully, without decoration, I spoke about the door, the smoke, the window, the waiting. I did not raise my voice. I did not soften anything either, as the details settled into the room. Something shifted inside me. What I had been circling all night finally took a solid shape. This was not confusion. It was not stress or misunderstanding or bad timing. It was a crime. Naming it did not knock the breath from my chest the way I thought it might. Instead, it steadied me. I felt the truth land, heavy but balanced, like a weight set down where it belonged. Papers moved across the desk. I signed where I was told, my hand steady despite everything. Each signature felt like a boundary redrawn, a line made clear. I noticed then how often age is treated as weakness. Sitting there, I felt the opposite. Time had given me urgency, not fragility. It had taught me what mattered and what no longer deserved protection. When I stepped back outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I understood that the next part of this would not be faced alone. Even if I did not yet know who would stand beside me, what mattered was that the truth was no longer wandering in the dark. I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, papers resting on my lap, watching people pass with their lives intact. The noise of the street felt distant, as if I were underwater. Present, but not fully part of it. That was when my phone buzzed, a small vibration that carried more weight than it should have been. The message was from my granddaughter. She asked if she could see me. There was no urgency in the words, just care when she arrived. She sat beside me without fuss, her presence steadying the ground beneath my feet. I noticed how carefully she watched my face, how she left space for me to breathe. She spoke about unease she had felt for weeks, about things that did not line up. I listened, recognizing the familiar pattern of doubt finally given permission to speak. She shared what she had seen on a screen she did not mean to look at, plans written plainly, relief anticipated after a night meant to end differently. The details settled quietly, confirming what my body already knew. I did not feel vindicated. I felt accompanied. We sat there, hands close, the truth no longer mine to carry alone. In that shared silence, something loosened. Trust, bruised but alive, found a place to stand. As we parted, I understood I could hold firm without hardening. Support did not have to be loud to be real, with her beside me, even briefly. I felt ready to face the boundary ahead and keep it closed. The calm stayed with me afterward. She came to the motel without warning. I recognized the knock before I opened the door, not by the sound, but by the pressure behind it. When I cracked it open, I saw the strain written across her face, urgency tangled with irritation, as if time itself were no longer cooperating with her plans. I stood still and let her energy move around me. She filled the hallway with motion, hands restless, breath uneven, eyes searching for the version of me that used to soften first. I watched the familiar pattern unfold in silence, the leaning in, the appeal disguised as concern, the frustration rising when control did not return on command. Inside, something stayed steady. I could see clearly how often I had mistaken urgency for need, how often I had been trained to respond. That instinct was gone. In its place was a quiet refusal that did not require explanation. She edged closer, as if proximity might do the persuading. I kept my hand firm on the door, feeling the solid weight of it under my palm. That small physical boundary carried more truth than any argument ever had. I felt my spine hold, surprising even me. There was a moment when she realized I would not move. The air shifted. Whatever she had come to collect was no longer available. I closed the door slowly, not in anger, but with finality, letting the latch settle into place. As the hallway fell quiet again, I understood something simple and lasting. Survival does not always shout. Sometimes it is the sound of a door closing and staying closed, and the strength to let what comes next arrive without chasing it away. The days that followed moved forward without drama. Officers returned to take statements. Photographs, measurements, papers arrived in envelopes thicker than I expected. Timelines spelled out in careful language. I read them slowly, signing where required, noticing how ordinary justice looks when it is doing its work. No raised voices, no spectacle, just process. I did not feel triumphant. What I felt was something settling, like dust after a long disturbance. Everything began to land where it belonged. The truth was no longer fragile. It was documented, supported, and carried by hands that were not mine alone. Practical matters filled the hours. Locks were changed. Temporary arrangements became permanent ones. My will was updated. My affairs tightened and clarified. Each task felt grounding, a way of anchoring myself back into a future I had not planned but was now responsible for shaping. When inspectors walked through the house, they moved room by room, marking damage, testing beams, tapping walls. They spoke of what could be saved, what would need replacing. The structure, they said, was sound. That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Work began soon after. Smoke-stained boards were removed, insulation was replaced, the smell of ash slowly gave way to clean air and fresh paint. Watching the repairs, I understood something important. Justice does not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it comes quietly, through clipboards and schedules and steady hands, restoring what was harmed without asking for applause. As the house healed piece by piece, so did I. The path forward was clear now, leading me back toward a place that was mine again, ready to be entered on my own terms. I returned on a quiet morning, key cool in my hand, the house waiting without ceremony. The air inside smelled clean, faintly of paint and new wood, nothing hidden beneath it. Light moved easily through the rooms, touching walls that had been scrubbed back to honesty. The front door opened without resistance, no pressure, no pause, just movement. I noticed how my shoulders responded, dropping on their own, as if they had been holding something heavy for years. The old door was gone, replaced by one that did what doors are meant to do. It let me in. I walked the hallway slowly, fingers brushing fresh trim, listening to the sound of my steps. When I reached the bedroom window, the same one I had climbed through to survive, I stood there without fear. The glass was clear. The latch worked. The outside lawn looked ordinary again. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the quiet settle into me. Not the kind that waits to harm, but the kind that belongs. People talk about revenge as noise and fire. For me, it turned out to be this: returning, breathing, living well without asking permission. As I moved through my home, whole and undisturbed, I understood that survival does not need witnesses. It rebuilds quietly and stands, ready for whatever comes next, with calm, dignity, and a heart. I have learned that survival is not loud. It does not announce itself with victory or demand witnesses. Sometimes it is simply the choice to keep going, to protect what is yours without asking for permission. When I think back on everything that happened, I do not remember the fire first. I remember the moment I stopped shrinking. That was the real turning point. Living well turned out to be the only response that mattered. If you are listening to this and something inside you feels familiar, I want you to know you are not weak for staying quiet, and you are not cruel for deciding to stop. Boundaries do not erase love. They make room for dignity. Rebuilding can be slow. It can feel lonely. There may be no applause when you finally choose yourself, but quiet strength still counts. Gentle courage still holds weight. I am grateful you stayed with me through this story. Sharing it has reminded me that truth connects us in ways silence never could. If you have ever rebuilt after loss, betrayal, or fear, or if you are learning how to now, I would love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments what survival has looked like in your life. Sometimes knowing we are not alone is the strongest beginning together always.